Accessibility in RuneScape is something I brought up quite a lot throughout the previous year in various videos, but I never really expanded on it. It's a topic I also discussed when I was invited to Jagex, and I'm still doing so till this day. I even was invited to talk with various people from the gaming industry, like people from Activision, to speak on the subject of accessibility and its importance within gaming. So with all that chatter, I thought it would be time to make a dedicated video on something I value very, very dearly. But what even is accessibility? Because a lot of people seem to think that it means making the game easier, but that's not really true and is the wrong way to go about it. So in this video, we will be discussing the topic at length. I will give you my insights on the subject, and I also want to hear from you. What accessibility features would you like to see in RuneScape? What could improve the game for people with visual, auditorial, or physical impairments? Let me know, and don't forget to leave a like on the video and subscribe. Let's get into it. Before we get onto the topic of accessibility, what it is and what RuneScape is doing very well and not so well, what even makes me an expert on the subject? Because as you guys know, I'm a social worker. I'm not a game developer. So what even gives me some credentials to speak to these people and for those people to listen to me to an extent? Well, if you don't know because you haven't watched my live streams or you've never really heard me discuss it, which is completely fine, I don't really discuss it all the time, I do have visual impairment. I have a lot of peripheral vision that I've lost through to nerve damage, but also I have all sorts of illnesses that I can go into detail, but then this video will be way too long, that damage my eyesight. I have about 45% in one eye and about 16% in my other eye, with a lot of parts just missing because, as I said, because of nerve damage. And I've also been playing video games for my entire life. So it's really just experience and just my general interest within gaming that gives me these quote-unquote credentials to talk to these people about it and give my personal insights on it. And a lot of these insights also come from the people that I've spoke to within the RuneScape community in general and listened to their complaints and their issues that they have when it comes to accessibility. So that is just kind of the outline of why I'm talking to these people and why these things are happening. I thought it was important to bring up, but let's get into what accessibility really is. Because I think this is where a lot of people go wrong with the term accessibility, and it's just mainly because it's very much misused, at least in my opinion, within the gaming industry. I think a lot of people confuse accessibility with approachability. A boss in RuneScape is accessible in the eyes of a lot of people when, for example, you don't need that much gear for it, or if you don't need that many quests to do it or whatever. That makes something accessible, but in reality, it makes it approachable. Accessibility in general, in the wider term, means making something accessible for people with impairments, whether that's a visual impairment, whether that's a physical impairment, whether that's an auditorial impairment, or any other impairment for that matter. And a lot of people also confuse accessibility in the sense that I am talking about it by making the game easier. Well, you just gotta make the game easier for those people because you want those people to play the game and spend money on it. Of course, the more people that can play your game, the better. And yes, companies make money on it. But there are also laws within just the world and within the gaming industry that require these companies to do certain things regarding accessibility. They're not as strict as I think they should be, but a lot of these companies, including Jagex, does quite a lot about accessibility and takes it really serious. Doesn't mean that RuneScape is the best accessible game when it comes to, visual, auditorial, physical, whatever. Absolutely not. There's a lot that needs to be done. But one thing I want to clarify, making things more accessible doesn't mean making the game easier. And to give you a better understanding of it, it's understanding where you need to change things and how you need to change things. And it's mainly by just drawing a strict line and kind of going about things of what should and shouldn't be accessible. An accessibility change shouldn't just make, let's take Telos for example, by far one of the hardest bosses. Making it more accessible could mean changing some of the projectiles that it shoots at you, making them more visible, or adding audio cues to it, or whatever it might be. It doesn't mean removing certain mechanics because, someone with a physical impairment can't react quick enough. It's just kind of like the reality of it is people with impairments, however you put it, will always have lines that they can't cross because of their impairment. It really sucks for them, but there aren't really changes that you can make for them that make it more accessible for them, but also destroying the experience for other people. Because at the end of the day, the people that do have impairments will always be in a minority. Thankfully, because if a lot of people struggle with these issues, that would just really suck for these people. And I think the majority of people that do have any sort of impairment are accepting of, well, I just can't do certain things in the game. But there are also a lot of things that the game offers that you should be able to do. And there are many examples within RuneScape, and I won't be going over all of them. I've discussed a lot of them with RuneScape himself, but I will give you ones that you might experience yourself. I think the absolute worst offender is the chat box in RuneScape. That is the dialogue window of the chat boxes where you just see all the dialogue within the game. There's no option to scale the text within that separately. There's no way to do it. Yes, you can scale your interface up and up and up, but then you get more interface clutter, which also takes away visibility in general and makes it more difficult. There needs to be a separate option to scale the chat box font, whether that's you having to spacebar through it more times than you normally do or whatever, but there needs to be something done. Because, for example, I can read it, but it takes a lot of energy for myself to be able to read it. RuneLite, for example, has a feature that just scales up your chat box, and I can easily read dialogue within old school, but I can't do that within RuneScape 3. And that is something that can be a huge change for myself and other people with visual impairments. Another thing that I briefly mentioned when I spoke about Telos is projectiles. I can't do Raksha because Raksha, of course, has its purple bomb mechanic, the purple projectile that fires the magic attack, but I can't see the range attacks. So, of course, I can predict it, whatever, but Zamorak, for example, has a very clear visual indicator of the red bomb being the mage attack, and then the big red spike is the range attack. If you add that to Raksha, which even make it a toggle for all I care, because, you know, I can understand that from a design point of view, big red bombs or big red, projectiles isn't the nicest thing to look at, but give us the option to turn it on, kind of how like Call of Duty, for example, had paintball mode. These features would make a huge change. That would make Raksha from an undoable boss for me to a doable boss. And it's not just for me, right? This is something that a lot of people that I spoke to about the topic also indicate. Like, another great example is audio cues. Why aren't there audio cues for certain mechanics or for certain, things that happen in a boss fight? I know a lot of bosses do have it, like for example Zamorak yet again is a great example. I think Zamorak might be one of the most accessible boss, oddly enough, even if it's a high-end boss within RuneScape, but there are also a lot of bosses that do have mechanics and don't really have a good indicator in it besides either a visual or, in certain cases, even an audio indicator, and it should always have both of them. But I think the worst thing that RuneScape does, and something that I think a lot of people really just brush over, are mechanics that are unnecessarily clunky, like timed stuff. A great example of this is the chemistry puzzle within the Void quest. I think it's the Void Stairs Back. You need to do a chemistry puzzle. I will flash an image on screen, so if you've done it, you know what I'm talking about. It is timed, and the puzzle itself is complicated as it is, right? Of course, you can use a guide and do it that way, but it is also timed. So if you don't do it quick enough, then, well, you're screwed. And because I personally miss, like, certain peripheral vision, I'm not able to constantly look at all the things that you need to take into account to be able to do the puzzle. But if you have a physical impairment, then you can also not do it quick enough, and then you're just locked out of that quest. And that's where the real important question starts to come in. Is the puzzle the ability to do it quick, or is it to solve the solution of doing the right chemistry? Sure, you can add some timer to it because, realistic stuff with chemistry you need to sometimes do quickly, but why does it have to be very, very short? Another great example of this is the Char's Cave, which, if you need to light the fires, it is already difficult to see where you need to light the fires if you struggle with colors, for example, if you're colorblind, because it's all kind of the same color there. And then the fires are also the same color as the places where you need to light it. But then again, it also goes out very, very quickly. So if you can't respond quickly because of a physical impairment, then you're screwed. Like, you can literally not do a quest that is really not that difficult. And I know that people will be typing up, well, then you shouldn't be able to do it. You just said that certain people can't do certain mechanics. But that's where you need to start asking yourself the question, are these mechanics needed or can they be made better? You don't have to change the fundamentals of it. You can still keep the same idea, but it's more so the mindset change. There are a lot of quests, for example, that came out recently where you can skip a boss fight or you can do a boss fight easier. Why don't you do that for these puzzles? Like, I'm not saying that you should make the puzzle like instantly completable or easier, or well, not, you need to make it easier, but not instantly. Maybe if you fail it 3 or 5 times. So, you know, you're still getting rewarded on doing it in the timed manner, but you know, if you really struggle, you can change it. And that is really important. Because a great example of this is the Dead and Buried quest. It's something I actually gave feedback on, and that's the slider puzzle. There were actually 2 options they were considering. A paid option, like you have in Monkey Madness, where you just pay a set amount of money and you would be able to just skip the slider puzzle. And the other one, which it highlights the correct pieces in a very bright red color, so you know, okay, that piece is in the right space. And I gave the second one as the piece of feedback of like, hey, that's the one you need to do. Because that way, it's still you solving the puzzle, but it's also very much more accessible for people that can't see the difference between the pieces that are on the puzzle. And that is really all that it is. It's a mindset change. It's not making the game easier, it's making the game more accessible. Changing things so that people will be able to do it. Whether that's colors, whether that's certain timed mechanics, whether that's certain ways you interact with certain pieces of content just in general, making projectiles more visible, adding better audio cues. All these things are very much important to make the game more accessible to a wider group of people. It can even help people that really don't struggle with visual things within RuneScape. If you can slightly increase the font size on your chat box, that might actually help you watching this video that doesn't really struggle with seeing the dialogue windows, but you might be thinking, it's kind of too small. For example, I always like to give the example of invert colors. Invert colors on something. Like, let's be honest, we all use dark mode on a lot of platforms because it changes the way you look at it and it's a lot nicer to look at. Inversion or dark mode or whatever the hell you want to call it used to be an accessibility feature. To give an example of myself, I needed 8 times magnification to be able to see on white background with black letters, but I only needed 3 times to see white letters on black background because of just the brightness of the letters and stuff. It's something that can make a huge change and make things just so much nicer for people, and it's such a small change, and it goes for many things within RuneScape. Funnily enough, actually the customization of your interface completely is quite a really good accessibility feature if you really look at it, because a lot of games don't really allow you to. Let's say you miss the right side of your vision, or you can only interact with the left side of your screen because of like some sort of physical impairment or whatever, like you can't move it too far or whatever. You just move everything to the left side of your screen, and that's a very good feature. Of course, the entire interface thing is very clunky and it doesn't really function properly, but in essence, it's actually really good. And RuneScape has quite a lot of those features that are just really good. Like, for example, a preset feature is actually a very good accessibility feature, oddly enough, besides it just being very handy for regular players. So no, accessibility doesn't need to make the game easier for people, but it can also even make the game more accessible to you as a regular player. And that's why I want to hear from you guys. I really hope that I got my point across properly. I'll probably record this video like 5 times because I want to do it right. But yeah, I want to hear from you in the comment section down below. Like, what accessibility features would you like to see? What do you think about the things that I've said? And let me know. Just leave a like in the video as well. Subscribe if you're new. And my name's Chevalric. See you guys in my next video.